Okay, how high priority is this? What's the impact? And then what's the effort from everybody's voice? And look at that, that's co-design. But I'm
Yeah.
doing it with a team.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of our listeners and watchers to another episode of the UX on Minds podcast. And this is actually another workshop episode. So those of you who have been following the UX on Minds podcast recently, you've noticed this new format of, let's say, podcast that I'm putting together, which is a workshop episode where we spend a bit more time with our guests, and the idea is to make what we're discussing a bit more practical and useful for our listeners. So I've had some great guests on so far, and we have another guest, actually a return guest. I think you might actually be the first return guest. So someone I've had in the past and has come back. So you deem the podcast worthy enough to come back. So I'm really happy to have Amanda Jensen on again. So thanks for coming here and running this workshop.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me again.
No problem at all, no problem. So we don't need to do introductions because we did that last time.
Yeah.
So I suppose we can jump straight into what this workshop is all about. So
Mhm.
if I remember correctly, it's entitled Design with and Not at, which I found
Mhm.
a very intriguing title. So the power of co-design in UX and product research. So what was your thinking around this workshop?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that has been a core tenet of my own practice as whether I was, operating as a designer or when I've been a strategist or a researcher. It's this notion of how do we remove hierarchy? How do we both
Mm,
come in at the same positionality and create with someone, with that participant, whether you're in the field in an ethnographic context or you're across a, nation or whatever, like interviewing someone remotely.
mm,
How do you design with them? How do you research with them? Not projecting at them your team's
yeah.
assumptions or your own cultural bias
Mm,
or just anything that you might be protruding onto the thing. It's a bit of that reflexive kind of positionality, those familiar with the research vein of it. But
mm.
yeah, it's something that I even branded when I was getting
Oh, wow.
out of graduating my undergrad
Mm,
degree. We had this like big portfolio kind of, all the seniors kind of
mm.
pitch or like have their own little booths and they could show all of their portfolio work, but also come up with their own, showcase their everything from brand, typography,
Mm,
systems identity, all the things, all my faves. And I actually put on my business cards, design with, not at. And that was
mm,
on the back of them. And then I would have different photos from when I had done those instances. So,
mm,
like whether there was a project, research project in South Africa, I would have a photo
mm.
of like my participants, of course, consenting, and just different instances where I had created with, those individuals and not at them. And that was just such a huge piece for me. That was like I
Mm,
would say 2015, that real movement or
mm,
rise of like human-centered design. And I was just
mm.
like, yes, like this is my jam. And,
Yeah.
being to, again, up until this point, I had been a studio art major and then formally trained as a designer, graphic design, communication design. So there
Mm,
was the piece missing. It
yeah.
was like, or you could create publications that were absolutely bamboozling and beautiful, and you could do, logo and identity and all these sort of attributes or services to a thing, but for me, it was the human piece that was missing. And so that's where I started to kind of, you know, simmer around this notion of like how could I quantify or put this in writing? And then it
Mm.
just kind of came out of my little head.
It's not little. No, no, that's really cool. You'll have to trademark this design with, not
Yeah,
add, seeing as you came up with it. But
right. So you get
is
that copyright.
exactly. No, no, I think it's a good thing to cover because even if like especially as researchers, we obviously our goal is to get the insights from our users via obviously the different research methods that we have. But sometimes we can still be guilty of still designing at our users because we in some cases we've all done it, I suppose. Like we start to subconsciously like do the research to validate our own assumptions or the assumptions
Or
of our stakeholders. Um, Especially now in the current kind of job market and climate, I'm
ooh,
finding that just from through my conversations with people that because of like job security and all of that, you can be guilty of trying to please your the stakeholders, the people who are running the project, etc.,
yeah.
out of fear that they don't like what you're showing them, and and obviously
Mhm.
with as I mentioned, the current job situation, that you lose your job because of it. But that's obviously not what our roles are. We're not there to champion assumptions and validate those. We're there to obviously design with our users and design something that in the long run is going to benefit our users, which will in turn benefit the business. So I think it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that that's a lot of ideation and kind of ways to creative solution through that come to
Mm,
mind. This idea of when we speak on the job market and appeasing and
mm,
meeting or not everyone feels this way, but I don't love the word validated, because I
no.
think again it's loaded, right?
Mm,
And I think there's individuals in our industries or even disciplines beyond that
mm.
that love that word and they want that done in a research study.
Yeah,
We need to validate this, but what is that doing? Right? Let's think about it. You're coming into an interview and you've got to check your boxes. You got
yeah,
to make sure that this, and this, and that, and like, wait a minute. What's the core intent of what we are doing? We are
yeah,
discovering, we are journeying with the participant. And I mean, what I try to do every instance when I sit in an interview, I act as if I am from that demo of that individual. If I'm working
yeah.
with a middle school student, if I'm working with an HR professional, if I'm
Mm.
working with a teacher, I work in ed tech, but whatever it may be, if I'm working with a dance studio instructor or someone who is a chief brewer at a distribution company or all the wild and cool people that I found to interview, this idea that it's we're on the same field here and
Yeah.
I want to know how you think and how
Mm,
that impacts the way you navigate through life, through a
mm.
product, through an
Yeah.
experience, because I don't know that
Mm,
until I'm, we're journeying. So
yeah.
for me, I think I hold that just tenet real serious, like,
Mm,
okay, but at the same time, your team members are your stakeholders,
yeah.
your investors, your decision makers, your leaders in your, organization are also just as important. So we can navigate all that in a strategic
Mm,
way, and I
yeah.
think rapport building, there's building trust in your own expertise, the value, the impact, inviting other disciplines into your interviews as an observer. I am, guilty as charged with doing that. I typically have anywhere from an AI engineer to a learning scientist to an instructional
Mm,
designer, PO, sitting in on my calls off screen and
mm,
or off camera, and
yeah.
they're there. But what does that do? That evangelizes in real time what
Mm,
the user is going through, good or bad. We also discover oftentimes, because as much as I love co-design, I'm huge on participatory research, or more formally, participatory action, PAR, from like the
mm,
ethical positionality. And, it's like, how do we co-design? How do we co-create? How do we
mm,
make something to aim or fit a need that you didn't even realize was like a sore thumb or like, ugh,
yeah.
I hate. So I think that strategy, right? Those chess moves of getting those people in
Mm,
calls or note taking or inviting them to your share outs, or like I like to do a create prioritization sessions based off of my recommendations pretty directly-ish
mm,
after a share out. And so everyone and, their cousin is on that call. We just go through and we go, okay, how high priority is this? What's the impact? And then what's
Mm.
the effort from
Mm.
everybody's voice? And look at that. That's co-design. But I'm
Yeah.
doing it with a team. And what does that do? I feel heard. I feel like valued as
Mm.
whatever I am, an engineer, a designer, a PO. I feel seen. And then
Mm.
that enables me to, well, who's doing this? Well, I love them. I'm going to
Mm.
trust their ability and know that they have my expertise and interests in mind and aim to position that with
Mm.
users. So it's
Mhm.
like you could look at it and maybe that's a unique spin I could take on this kind of topic whenever I am sharing out or speaking about it is it's not just a participant.
Mm.
How do you co-design with your team and your
Yeah.
stakeholders to make that research, again, to be that advocate, to be that conduit for the
Mm.
participant? It's like you're playing the field, you're playing all sides, but it's highly valuable.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was something I wanted to actually ask you because obviously in this part one you entitled it Code Design as a Methodology. So
Mm,
I know you mentioned it kind of briefly touched on the idea of designing with our participants, but how do you feel it's best, or how do you go about making sure that like all of your team are involved in the design or research process? Because I had my experiences, but obviously you've got a lot more experience than me. So I'd be interested to history. I'd be interested to know how, because not everybody is always on board with getting
true.
involved. I've noticed they like
I
to
have
hear and
also
see the
experienced.
results, but
Yeah.
when you actually say, "No, I'd like to get you involved, and I want you to be a part of this process," because usually you're the one that has all of the questions at the end of it all. So you try to get them
Mm.
involved, but then they're a bit hesitant. So how do you manage that kind of getting these ones involved?
Yeah, I think it starts from the moment you're onboarded. Say you've been in an
Mm.
org for a while, you go to a new team. I'm going to set up a meet and greet. I want to know who you
Yeah.
are, who it is that I'm working with, right?
Mm.
And so by building, that's rapport. That's kind of like water cooler talk, like getting to know one another, and
Yeah.
you might have a lot of keen or similar
Mm.
interests. And
Yeah.
then also learning a little bit about their history. Why are they here?
Mm.
What brought them to their role, and what do they think about like the nuclear of it all? And
Mm.
so for me, that's like step one. I love a meet and and then from there, I love to hold cross-functional meetings, whether they're async or, where it's more of a touch point or,
Yeah.
synchronous. I have long held one with all of my cross-functional researchers, so not just UXRs, but IR. I work very
Mm.
closely with impact research because, we're on that same USA team with the
Mm.
batons, handing it off around that track, if you will. And so very collaborative and just heads down, always supporting each other and
Yeah.
workshopping, building out studies, giving each other protocol feedback.
Mm.
Again, that builds rapport, that
Yeah.
builds connection, and also like a reverence for one another's expertise. You see it in
Mm.
live action. And then I also hold weekly or bi-weekly with designers, my UI, my UXDs
Yeah.
on my team to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? How do we need to do this? And then oftentimes, and this helps just from my design background, and I've taught it design as well, it's being able to just get pulled into some of the design specific meetings, like
Mm.
here's a UI question. What do you think? You were in those interviews. Like, I remember the participant was doing this, and like they take on that initiative because they
Mm.
saw it happening. And so again, that's another
Yeah.
metric, another measure of impact. And
Yeah.
then oftentimes, anytime I'm building out a study, I will invite like everyone to view the protocol. So
Okay.
like it's just like shooting that link out there and be like, get it, just like let's look at this. And then that opens up opportunities to comment in questions,
Mm.
or I would love this or that. That would be so
Yeah.
interesting, or I didn't even think about this. Could we add this?
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
last kind of thing on this topic I would say I do is I usually hold a side chat that's
Hmm.
specific to the team in which is, the very cross-functional team. So this is a chat where we can ping each other the whole time through a live interview. So
Mm.
oftentimes, like in some cases, it's like a live teleprompter. And so I
Oh,
could be getting a question just coming through the barrel and be
oh wow.
like, so, like, I don't
Let
know,
me.
just because like maybe that AI engineer was like, oh my gosh, they just said this thing. We've
Mm.
never thought about how to leverage that. Maybe we should try and interweave that, and then a question comes through, or
Mm.
we're sending memes, or I'm like, oh my God, I'm cackling because, this kid just has to go to the bathroom in the middle of my interview, like
There's some weird
whatever
stuff
happens.
happening in interviews.
Yeah, but it's like you're in the trenches
Yeah,
together, right? So
yeah,
that's another, a
mm.
strategic move where you're getting your own buy-in and
Yeah,
value in what you do, but then voices are heard. You're getting that
mm.
connection with others, and then there's this just beautiful moment where it's like we're just all in it together. And then by the time the share out
Yeah,
comes, most of those team members are quite familiar with the work. They saw those
yeah,
pain points, they saw those revelatory moments,
mm.
and they're just like, how do we get this done?
Yeah,
How do we do this? Or
yeah,
they champion that in meetings when they're not even in
yeah,
a cross-functional call, So
yeah.
I think that those are some of the tactics that I've used that I've
Okay.
found to be quite successful in this
Mm.
sort of org-centric designing or researching with not app.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thanks for sharing those ideas and also experiences. Do you feel as well? This is always a doubt that I've had that you need to get so for this kind of co-designing methodology that
Mhm.
it's something that should be done on all research or all design projects, or should you be more selective on the
Mhm.
certain types of tasks or projects that you're researching or designing for? Is it something across the board you get folk involved, or are there some projects where you need to focus on that and you probably you're the one that needs to just be involved in that? How do you view that?
Right. You know what? I would say it's a little bit of like D all the above.
Okay.
Depending on the use case, the era of time, or the way
Mm.
in which we're moving on the roadmap,
Mm.
or the life cycle of the product. I think you can lean in or lean
Mm.
out as much as you want, but for
Yeah.
me, my feet are always going to be ankle deep in
Mm.
that design and participatory
Yeah.
positioning, because you could have hi-fi
Mm.
designs, and this thing is nearly coded, and it's
Mm.
incredibly robust, and what have you. But there is always opportunity. There's always sight unseen. There's a corner we had not turned down yet.
Mm.
And, and I've had this happen just recently. I just concluded a study, and, I've been talking to this demographic for, a few months now. And there was this huge, like, eye-opening moment in one of those interviews that it just hadn't been called out yet, but it was like universally applied. Like it was a non-negotiable, like had to happen for
Mm.
this demo. And it made so much sense. Like that clarity hit, just, it's more from the position of it's universal, not because everyone thinks the same, but more like
Mm.
attend to that discipline. And this is something that has to be there and called out, but wasn't actually ever mentioned quite yet.
Mm.
Like a legal perspective, it has to have. So that's where it's a little universal. But
Yeah.
in that regard, I think there's always opportunity to weave it
Mm.
in,
Yeah.
whether you've got a focus group, or
Mm.
a one-on-one, or
Yeah.
you're doing a panel of some sort, like that you continually meet with the same individuals. You could have, say, and I've done this before, like I've structured a focus group, for instance, where we worked with a middle school teacher, and
Okay.
I would usually have three at a time in my 90-minute interviews. And I would have core questions in the beginning, which were kind of getting at, okay, what's our value? Where's our
Mm.
buy-in? What's our temperature setting here? And then we go through the product user flow in full. And then at the end, I always had core questions that I asked across the board to all that I was interviewing that were
Mm.
about value proposition
Mm.
and buy-in and
Mm.
use cases and product features. How's this gonna, optimize your life as a middle school
Mm.
teacher? Like things like that.
Mm.
And I believe that that was just so fruitful. And so
Mm,
like that kind of having that spine or that kind of, automation to where you enter your research practice as considering like how can I get like a real almost beefed up positioning
mm,
on this thing, well, you just keep adding to that pot.
yeah.
Your user flow of the product you're testing could be at different states, could be at different iterations, maybe it's
Mm,
different content entirely, but you're still getting all of those core insights that are going to really impact your product roadmap,
mm,
always be closing, make the
yeah.
thing sell, and it gets you that insight that I
Mm.
think is fruitful. So, I mean, maybe I sound biased, but I would say always, interweave that in. I think that comes
Yeah.
back a little bit to all of us as professionals, let me put
Mm,
my strategy hat on. I think when we
mm,
figure out our North Star, our things
mm,
that are really just uniquely Dale or
yeah.
uniquely Amanda,
Mm,
like what do I bring? What am I passionate about? What am I
mm.
like on my little soapbox? And I'm just like, do this, if
Mm,
you really think and you stew and ruminate on those things,
mm,
figure out like if that's you and just go for
mm.
it.
Yeah.
Find ways to, again, from the positionality to champion in our world, those users, those individuals,
Mm.
and do it in a way where it's uniquely you.
Yeah. No. And yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important things to take away from this discussion in part one is like have like this, especially with the co-designing, is good to get everyone involved and but also bring yourself. Don't just become a cookie cutter
Yeah.
research or design, and make sure you do bring your unique skills and abilities to the way you design or the way you conduct the research, and that will be something unique that when you are maybe applying for another job in the future, you can highlight that and you can
Right.
talk about that in your interviews. Actually, one thing again, just going through this co-designing idea, yeah, again, it's something that I've kind of battled with in the past, is when you come to the analysis part of research and you're going through data, interviews, etc. How do you? I I've done different things. Probably the one thing I settled on is having a form of like a mini brainstorm on a part of I don't know, the insights that I've collected, or even just the raw data that I'm going through, because I
Oh,
do need my time to go through the analysis myself to kind of
oh
make sense of
yes.
it. But I also was aware of if I'm going to involve various stakeholders, engineers, or I don't know, product managers, etc., in the
Mm-hmm.
process,
Mm.
I couldn't exclude them from that part because that obviously is a major part of the
Right.
design or
Right.
research process. But obviously, if you get everyone together in a team meeting or whatever, and you just
Mhm.
present them with a screen of raw data, that can be kind of overwhelming. A bit like, okay, where do we start?
Yeah.
And you can't just sit there in silence as you go through stuff. So,
Right.
how do you? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I don't want to drop you on the spot with this, but
No,
I don't know if it's
no.
something you had in mind to discuss. But
Right, yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, and again, everyone's their unique little
yeah.
beautiful oyster, and they can do their journey, and the world is theirs to behold. But for me, I typically am very like if we think about it, of like you've entered my like den of
Yeah,
data.
Lair.
Like I have people very involved in the
Mm,
protocol and the feedback, live in the chat during those
mm,
interviews. We're champion, we're blah, blah, blah. And then when I step into my den of like analyzing and synthesizing,
mm.
it's much more of like we're gonna solo jams here.
Okay,
So
yeah.
like that's typically where I'll be more solo. Sometimes though, I would lean on my IR, like my impact researcher, to
Mm,
kind of like live talk through the data. And
mm.
this is really a fun thing. It's quite conversational because especially if they've been in the interviews, which they almost always attend, um, is this idea where you start being like, yeah, well, I saw that, or blah, 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 and then this.
Mm.
And then you start to realize like, oh my God, yes, I remember that, right? Two minds
Mm.
sometimes are better than one when you're
Yeah.
a crazy Figma that's clickable, and you're looking at behavioral data while you're talking to them, while you're building rapport, and you're sending memes and GIFs on a team chat. There's a lot going on actually for my interviews at least.
It's
Um,
true, true.
and so for me, it's fun to do a little bit of like talk show vibes, like with my
Hmm.
researcher. I'll also do this with my designers who often are
Mm.
in interviews as well. And
Mm.
so like I just had a call yesterday in one of my weekly syncs where we're just like, yeah, design, music, blah, like
Mm.
together. They were like, hey, so like hard and fast, like what are some of the updates? Do you think we can get this out ahead of the release? And I had already, had synthesized a lot of it, preparing for like a share out. So I was like, look here, here's why. Like, and
Mm.
I'm tried and true Miro girly. Please sponsor me. And I do a lot of my
I can send
synthesis.
this through to them.
There we go. Yes. A lot of my synthesis and analysis in Miro, I think because I come from that tenet or background of design, very visual person, but I
Mhm.
had my stickies ready and I just
Yeah.
showed that designer and I'm like, this is why this hits. This is why we need to do this. We never thought about this one before, but woof, we've got to include that because man,
Yeah.
it's going to make a huge impact. So,
Mm.
again, having it like I've already gone through like the jungle with my
Mm.
little machete and just zapping around to get it where it's a little more like, and then by the time we get in the share out, of course, those really close working cross-functional
Mm.
players, I'll be
Yeah.
like, here's the key, like here's the little tidbit ahead of time. But then in
Mm.
the, formal share out, I'll actually go through and explain
Yeah.
all the bits and bobs. And then those
Mm.
prioritization times where we look at all of the UXR, recommendations, what I found, those top level things.
Mm.
That's where we bring all the homies back into the kind of session where we do that,
Mm.
high impact, high value, low effort, like all that.
Mm.
So it's pretty much like that's the only time I would
Okay.
say that I'm a little more solo jams is just heads down, do the bits and bobs of analysis, come back up for air a few times with ride or die, cross-functional, like nuclear, the people that I'm constantly working with, and
Yeah.
then loop back in the full team. So it's
Sure.
it's like its
Okay.
own co-design life cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's super interesting. Thanks for kind of walking through that as well and helping me especially, but also our listeners hopefully to visualize that as well. So thank you. So I would say probably we're coming to the end of part one. So kind of the introduction to this co-designing, design with and not at. So in the second part, I can see the title now, user-obsessed product design. So I'm looking forward to, I imagine, delving deeper into this co-designing space and ideas. So again, thank you for going through this on part one, and I'm looking forward to part two.
Wonderful. Can't wait.